Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a ton to discuss. Actually, this episode is going to be very, very special because I do have a guest that I will bring on here very shortly. Got a few things I want to take care of up at the top. As always, thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. If you do appreciate this content, you do appreciate me being able to bring on people such as this, subscribe to the channel, whether it be on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. It really does help me out. I absolutely appreciate it. Additionally, thank you so much to the Believe Podcast Network. For those of you unaware, I have partnered with them. So if you do hear any ads as happens over on Apple or Spotify, those do help out the channel, and I do appreciate those. But as I mentioned, and without further ado, I do have a guest on this episode. That guest is none other than Nick Kelly, Alabama beat reporter. So I'm going to kick it over to the episode that I recorded to him just earlier. So today we're joined by none other than Nick Kelly. For those of you that may be unaware to who Nick is, he's one of the beat writers for Alabama basketball, Alabama football, some other things around the city of Tuscaloosa, formerly of the Tuscaloosa News, now of AL.com. His Twitter handle is linked down below him, but it's @_Nick Kelly. If you don't follow him, you really should. He's one of the main guys that follows Alabama sports that I really recommend checking out. So welcome to the show.
And good to be with you, Owen. Let's talk some Alabama sports, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually going to ease you in with a question that I know is going to be near and dear to your heart. It's the only non-Alabama sports-related topic, but when you first got hired at Tuscaloosa News, you worked for a legend in Tuscaloosa, or with a legend in Tuscaloosa, and Cecil Hurt. For anybody unaware, he was a part of the team that wrote the Pulitzer Prize winner for the April 27th tornadoes, as well as, the Mike Shula foreshadowing, when Mike Shula got fired. I know he introduced you to a lot of people at around the university and athletics, but what did he teach you about how Alabama works as a system, not just on the journalistic side?
I mean, there wasn't a ton, so we only worked together for about 6 months. So it was a little limited because it was also 2021, so it was kind of still COVID-y, so to speak. Like it was still limited to a certain extent what we were doing. Most of our interviews were still on Zoom, so we weren't in person for a lot of things at that point. But I would say the things that Cecil probably taught me the most, or just showed me the most of, to help me understand this fan base or to understand what it's like covering sports down here, is the idea that everyone knows more than you do, so to speak. And part of that's tongue in cheek, but like part of it's legit advice, part of it's kind of just I don't know, slight, but it's just kind of a comment of like most people will think they know more, and you just kind of let them roll with it. And everyone's got to take, and everyone feels strong about it. And that's what makes covering Alabama so fun, is that people are passionate and they do care and they do feel strongly about their viewpoints. And but also part of that advice, I think, more the serious side of that is Cecil talking about that the idea that these people know more, or that they, hearing them out kind of thing, like making sure that you listen to them. And so that's where I thought that was helpful, and really just being authentic. He didn't give me that advice explicitly, but I think what made him be someone that people read, wanted to talk to, bought into, as a person, and frankly, a brand to an extent of just the way he did things, was being authentic and really just authenticity in general. Like he appreciated authenticity, and he was just himself. He didn't try to be something that he wasn't. He wasn't fake. He was Cecil Hurt, and I think just seeing that and how he worked, and really getting to know people who knew him well for the time that I wasn't there, because again, we only worked together for about half a year. It was a really good opportunity for me to learn how authenticity, I think, is what made him so popular and why people liked him.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like I said, I knew that y'all crossed paths, and for those of you unaware, but Cecil Hurt's also a larger part of Nick's story. He wrote a story about how he met his wife. Roundabout with Cecil. One of Cecil's longtime friends, and the circumstances surrounding that. So if y'all have not checked out that article, it's a really cool article Nick put out not that long ago. But we can move on to football. I just wanted to kind of ease in with a fun one, but. I'm sure you remember where you were when you got the news Nick Saban was retiring. For me, it feels like as an Alabama fan, it's similar to everyone remembers that we're on 9/11, or it's one of those major events as a fandom. Where Nick Saban were when you got that news. What was the next 24 hours for you as a journalist, right? Because as a fan, we're just losing our mind and freaking out. What was the next 24 hours for you like?
Oh boy. it's kind of you suppress some of that information and just don't think about it because it was so chaotic. It really was, and you knew it was going to happen at some point. You kind of expected, as long as I was going to stay on this beat, I was going to be covering Nick Saban's retirement, and we prepared for that. We prepared for that scenario, but it still doesn't feel real until it actually happens. And it frankly didn't feel real that day, and I think most fans can attest to that as well. Like, you knew it was a possibility. He's in his 70s. People can't do it forever, nor should they. I mean, they should be able to enjoy their spoils from their success a little bit. So you knew it was going to happen, but at the same time, when that actually hit, when that Chris Lowe tweet hit from ESPN's own, it just was surreal and kind of that, oh my goodness, what is? I mean, like, you don't even almost think about what the next 24 hours or the next 72 hours, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months are going to be like, but you just know in the back of your mind that a bunch of work is about to occur. And I was on the phone with my father-in-law, who you alluded to before. He was Cecil Hurt's good friend, and I got the notifications on my watch, kind of thing. And seeing that, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to go! Nick Saban's retiring." And he didn't. My father-in-law didn't believe me, but I hung up and he found out. And so yeah, it was pretty chaotic. And really, it's just trying to get a handle on, okay, what just happened. The first step was trying to figure out if it was true, right? I mean, not that I had any reason to doubt Chris, but uh, it's just a case of good journalism of making sure that it's accurate, and it was, and so confirming that information, finding out things like the fact that he was interviewing candidates that day for openings on his staff, which is pretty wild. Learning that in the couple hours after that, and so just talking to people that or around the program, around the facility, around college football, trying to get a sense of like what is happening right now, what interest is there. And yeah, I think the Dane Landing stuff came out that night. I mean, it's definitely within the first 24 hours. And it was a case of, okay, trying to figure out if there's any truth to that, which there was not. He was not in Tuscaloosa, but trying to figure out just who's a possibility, who could take this job, who would want this job. So you're working the phones, you're just trying to glean anything you can. And I think I would be much better prepared today than I was even back in 2023 because I was only a couple of years on the beat at that point. So yeah, it was just a chaotic point and just a surreal and chaotic, I think, are the words, Owen, that I keep coming back to that stand out the most because it was totally those two things.
Yeah, and I think part of that probably also doesn't help the fact that how Greg Byrne does his coaching hires. You've for those of you that were around when Nate Oates was hired, there was so much smoke, and Greg Byrne often will say like, "Hey, don't believe it until you hear it from me," because like in most cases, the first name you hear is not true, right? It's not this place with the way Greg Byrne does his hires is not the same as every other place, right? It's not that first name you hear, or even the second or third name you hear, right? I honestly was even still skeptical of if it was going to be DeBoer because we started hearing his name so much. With college football, obviously a little bit more, scrutiny around it. So that makes sense. But like, that was the one that even surprised me because that's just how Greg Byrne does his hiring. So you are a little more confused about it. So, like, on more of the beat side, how different was last season covering DeBoer led versus Saban led? I know obviously y'all had access to freshmen. If Ryan Williams has the breakout season with Saban, you would have never got to speak to him. You get to speak to assistant coaches mid-season, which was kind of new. Was there anything else major that kind of stood out about the way that they address the media? Obviously, it's changing with NIL, but like specifically media related.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some differences. One thing I was going to say though about coaching searches, Greg Byrne, he is good at keeping things quiet, but college football is so big and just so talked about that it's hard. It's one thing to keep, say, a baseball coach or even a basketball coach quiet, to keep the real candidate name quiet. But and I think that he had some people thinking that, well, these names can't be true. Like literally, I reported, as others did too, that the board was one of the top candidates. People were like, well, these must not be the names then because he's keeping it secret. I mean, I think he does a good job of keeping it secret or quieter when it's, say, baseball or basketball, but it is trickier when it's football because it's the biggest show on, in the country, really, and so it is a little trickier that way. So that's kind of what happened there. But to answer your question about differences in media, I do think that one of the biggest differences was Kalen was more accessible, and part of that was it was Nick Saban, who's larger than life celebrity, and he didn't necessarily need local relationships as much as a new coach would, because Nick Saban had plenty of goodwill built up from, let's just start with 6 national championships.
Yeah.
So he didn't quite need to maybe worry about doing a press tour or going around and doing as many booster club events or as many red elephant club events or things like that. That not that he ignored it, it's just more that he doesn't have to worry about quite as much politicking in that regard because it was Nick Saban. He didn't need to. Whereas a new coach, Kalen DeBoer, he needs some of those relationships. He needs to build up that goodwill. So I think that yeah, there was much more availability. Kalen talked more, did more events, I think, and so we had more access to him. But they, yeah, to your point, Owen, we also talked to more players. We talked to assistant coaches every single week, which had not happened under Nick Saban. So it was very different. Now it is going to be different this year, at least as of right now. The plan is to have uh, very much so more limited assistant coach interviews than they were before. So it is going to look different this year. But yeah, it was it was pretty wide open a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, very, very curious. Like that was something that was, for those of you unaware, Nick Saban kind of got it from Bill Belichick when, Belichick famously, both of them didn't allow assistant coaches until the postseason. The first time you would ever speak to a head coach or an assistant coach was, national championship media days. Often was the first time you would hear playoff media days. So that was something very new that, this past year, Nick Sheridan and Kane Womack were on the stand right before DeBoer was, right? It was just a completely different mindset. If you had to say like for now, and I'm not just talking about on the field, like I'm also referring to roster construction and everything. We're like a year and a half post that Nick Saban retiring and Kalen DeBoer hiring. How would you assess the job that you think he's done to this point? And like I said, I'm not just saying on the field. Obviously, some people can have thoughts on that. But how he's built the roster, how he's retained, coaches, even bringing back Ryan Grubb. Like, what do you think about kind of how that looks?
Yeah, I think in some ways he's done fine. In other ways, there's much to be desired. I don't think it's a secret that they did not handle success well a season ago, right? Where they had these big wins, and then the following week they would follow it up with a loss or a poor performance. So they've got to get that ironed out. Now, I do think that Kalen can operate in ways this season that he couldn't a year ago, in the sense of he can maybe use a different tactic of just handling players because a year ago he was just trying to keep a roster together more than anything and trying to keep guys from leaving more than at any point because they'd not committed to play for him, or most of them had.
Mhm.
So much of it was just about keeping the fabric in place and not being a massive disruptor to what kind of they had before. But now he can kind of run the program the way he wants, maybe rule with a little tougher fist, so to speak, than I think he could have a year ago, frankly. And that doesn't mean he's going to turn into Nick Saban all of a sudden, maybe in terms of the iron fist that Nick Saban rolled with. But I think he can be a bit more firm and a bit stricter, frankly, in year two when these guys did come to play for him, and he's not just trying to keep this patchwork roster together. So, yeah, I think that there's much to be desired from what they did a year ago. It wasn't good enough, and I think it will be a failure if they miss the college football playoff this year. But I think they'll make it. I really do think this is going to be a good football team, and it could be a great football team if Ty Simpson plays well at quarterback or whoever plays quarterback. But right now, he's the leader of the clubhouse. So I think they're going to be fine. And I think that year two for DeBoer is often a really good year. And there's no reason to believe it won't be this year too. But if it's not a good year, then things are going to get real tough in Tuscaloosa.
And you actually just led into kind of the thing that I was going to ask about, right? Like, I thought that last year again, like the positives and negatives, people on this show have heard me talk about the fact that the players had just committed to play for DeBoer just one time, right? You believed him post Saban, but at this point, players have committed to play for DeBoer on 2 and 3 occasions that they could have entered the transfer portal. I think it says a lot about the team that you didn't have anybody enter in the spring transfer portal window. That means that every person that had that ability said, "Oh no, I still want to play for DeBoer. I still want to play for this staff, etc." Right? So I think that there's value in that. But in my thoughts, I think that a playoff has to be the bare minimum goal for next season for Alabama football because I think that when you look back at what Saban did, people are always going to point. And again, I said this before: if you're looking to replace DeBoer with or replace Saban with Saban. So did everyone else. That's the reason why every SEC coach got fired while Saban was the coach, right? But the question becomes like Saban would have made the playoff every year. And that's something that fans will point to if he misses it again. So like is the playoff the goal at the end of the day that like if you don't make that has to be the bare minimum floor for next season, you have to make the 12-team playoff? Or do you think that the goal needs to be, you need to make the SEC championship game? Like what would your say like again floor goal for next year's team, not what you think they can achieve, right? Because can achieve, I think they have the talent to win the title, right? Whether they will or not, it's a whole different question. But I'm talking about pure like, hey, this is what they should be able to minimum do.
College football playoff. I mean, if they don't make it, then I think they messed up big time. They've got the roster to make it, so they should make it. But doesn't mean they will. There's enough parity in college football. Now, I don't think that that means, say, if they don't make the playoff, that DeBoer would get fired. That's not what I'm saying. I just think that they're in a real tough spot, and the scrutiny is just going to increase tenfold. Frankly, I don't think he gets fired for the big reason being he's still got a massive buyout. So, yeah, it's at a point where they need to make the playoff. Otherwise, there are going to be a lot of people who are really upset. There were people who were really upset when he didn't make the playoff in year one. He literally had, I think, the second best uh, win total for a first year coach at Alabama ever. Now, of course, he was following up Nick Saban. But I will contest that the roster he had is not as good as some people would make you think he had. It was good. Don't get me wrong, but they lost Caleb Downs, who was arguably the best player coming back on the roster. He's one of the best players in the country. And there's some evals that the staff might have missed on at times for some of the recruits they had. So it's not like Nick Saban handed them the 2020 roster and they didn't make the playoff with the 2020 roster. It wasn't that good. I mean, even Nick Saban, I know the assumption is that he would have made the playoff every year, and he probably would have in terms of this past year because he was really good. One of his best talents was getting his guys to play consistently week in, week out. They did not have those letdown games, not very often at least. And that was this team's biggest issue. But people, I think, compare Kalen, they compare just these Alabama teams to what the height of Nick Saban's dynasty was. And the reality is that Nick Saban's last few years were not as good if people were honest about it. I mean, they still did well by most team standards, but they weren't the dynasty level of good where they just beat everyone badly. It's tough in this new era of NIL. The talent is more spread out. And I think that Nick Saban was finding that out. So Nick Saban won in a different era of college football that even if Nick Saban were still the head coach of Alabama, he would not be winning at the same level that he did. I truly believe that. And that's not a shot at Nick Saban. It's just the reality of college football now where it's really hard to pull all the talent into one pool, like they or into five pools kind of thing in terms of the top five teams or so. So I don't even remember what your question was, Owen, but you just got me going talking about Nick Saban. The floor of this team. I think it really is the playoff. And if they don't make the playoff, then they messed up.
No, and you're 100% right. And for you and for those that are unaware, I was in school during the heyday. The stat that I always bring up when people ask about the football success while I was in school, we won two national titles and two national titles and had four losses in my 4 years in school. And that would have been changed had not for the pick play against Tony against Tony Brown and Hunter Renfro. That play was the difference in me having three titles and three losses in 4 years. I mean, just so yeah. I mean, that level of precedent. There may never be another 4 year stretch in college football that's even close to that, right? Just the levels Saban was at, were unprecedented for when they happened, and we're unprecedented now. So I agree that that's kind of my thought for the playoff. I just was curious if somebody that's, obviously there's some bias because you are the beat writer for Alabama, but there's also some objective nature because you didn't grow up, the guy that was just cheered for Alabama, or that was always, I've been in the state my whole life, so it's a little different. Obviously, I know I have the biases. So a couple of quick ones toward the end as we're wrapping up. But what do you think the impact of Ryan Grubb is? I thought that Nick Sheridan did an okay job last year. I thought that he had some issues, maybe sequencing plays, but I didn't think in general he was a failure. but I do think that Ryan Grubb brings some additional, things to the offensive play calling. What do you expect the changes to be? Obviously having Grubb back from Seattle.
Yeah, first on Sheridan, I will say that I think he really can't be completely judged on this past season. Don't get me wrong, Brian Grubb, bring him in. Yes, you do that because he's a great offensive coordinator. So that makes a ton of sense to have him as your OC. He's one of the best in the country, if not the best. But for Nick Sheridan, they had a different offense than I think that the DeBoer system is used to running because of what Jalen could and could not do. So I'm not saying that Nick Sheridan is just an all world offensive coordinator, but I do think that uh, I was eager to see what he could do if they didn't get Grubb in a year two with a more traditional DeBoer style, because I did just want to see kind of what Sheridan would do with that. But to the point about Grubb, I think he's a complete game changer for the program. Not just in how he calls plays, because he's a great play caller, but he is a guy who is intense. I mean, I've had several people tell me and describe him as intense, and he's just a guy who's kind of in charge. Like he's very much so. Like he's gonna get stuff done, and he's got a little bit of that Nick Saban will chew. You know what's during practice or when it's necessary. So he's a tough dude and very personable too. That's the fun thing. Like talking to him, at press conferences or whatnot. Like he's very friendly, just Iowa guy, grew up uh, farming hogs and stuff like that. So it's kind of an interesting character, but I think he just brings a mix of not only great play calling, but also just great leadership that I think is going to go a long way in terms of getting these guys prepared. And Kalen and him know how to work so well together. They've done it at multiple stops. And so it's a great fit. I mean, it's a fantastic fit, and I'm really eager to see what he can do for this offense.
Yeah, I've even heard it described as like a good cop, bad cop, with DeBoer. Obviously, DeBoer being a little bit more soft spoken, not to say that he doesn't punish players, because of course you have to, right? You're a head coach. But like I have heard it, labeled as a good cop, bad cop kind of scenario because, Grubb has a little bit less of a filter, so to speak, than DeBoer maybe does. Um, all right. So give me one player that you think has a chance to like maybe see the field in a role that people aren't expecting. I know Brooks from the wide receiver room is a name that we've heard mentioned a lot. Is there anybody else that you're hearing maybe just like, and this doesn't have to be a crazy, in-depth answer, but just like one name that maybe Alabama fans should know a little bit more closely or pay attention to as fall camp and season rolls around?
Yeah, how under the radar does it need to be?
He didn't need to start last year.
Okay. I would say I'll give you a couple. Rico Scott, I think, is a name to watch at receiver. I think he can see a bigger role. I don't think he's going to start necessarily, but I think he's going to get some
Sure.
decent snaps. In the defensive back room, I heard a lot of good things about Dejon Lee, the freshman cornerback during the spring. I think he's going to be able to help this defense. Then you look at Zay Mincy at safety. Technically, he started that last game at safety with Malachi out, but I think they're going to have to get him playing time, even with Keon Sabb and Bray Hubbard healthy. Like you want to get Zay Mincy on the field, so I would not be surprised to see a good bit of him. And I think they view him highly. I think he's got NFL safety potential. Like he's going to be a dude. So I think those are three names that come to mind immediately that I'm personally watching. And yeah, Latsir Brooks is another one I think would be great to include in that list. But and then one more, he kind of started some, but James Smith on the defensive line. I think he gets healthy. He got a chance to be a game wrecker. So I'm real curious to see how he does for him too.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some names that I definitely heard some of. Some names that I did not. I'll definitely have to take some extra looks in. Sounds like the defensive backfield, is a place that is going to be really good. And it's obviously great because we obviously have some receivers that can tempt them, and some quarterbacks that can potentially air it out a little bit more. Being more skilled passing, as compared to running, where Jalen was just an elite athlete on the ground. I am going to put you on the spot for this one question as of today, and I know you hinted at it earlier, who's your starting quarterback? Not for the first game, for the Georgia game on September the 27th. Because I do not think that the starter for the first game has to be the same as for that Georgia game. But I think by the Georgia game, you have to have figured out this is the guy, this is who the team is rallied behind, this is our guy moving forward.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the same answer. It's Ty Simpson, just because at this juncture, Owen, there's nothing that I have to believe that he's been bumped from that top spot, and I know that could change at that point, but he seems to be making progress. He's solid. I think the biggest thing that stands out is you need a quarterback who, yeah, can make some good throws, but is not going to make a ton of mistakes because they've got weapons. Like you talked about, the receivers they have, they got some dudes there. I mean, they've got a lot of good options for whoever's going to play quarterback. Tight end, they should have some options there. Running back, they've got some guys. So you want a guy who's going to take care of the football, who knows what he's doing. I just I can see the possibility of Keelan. I can see the possibility of an Austin Mack even. But I just don't know that specifically for what is it, week 4 for that
Mhm.
Georgia game.
Yeah.
I still think it might be early for Keelan Russell. And now, if Ty struggles early in the season, then maybe you do consider something else. But at this point, it's such a hypothetical of him struggling. I think as long as he plays decently well in the first couple games, I see no reason why you wouldn't start him against Georgia because you've got what should be a great defense. You've got some really good skill players. You just need decent to good quarterback play to beat, I think, a lot of teams they'll play. They don't need superhero quarterback. Doesn't hurt if you get it. Doesn't hurt if you get it. But to me, even just watching A Day, for folks who were there, I mean, Ty didn't make some spectacular throw that stood out like that my jaw was dropping, but he also didn't make any plays that I'm like, oh my goodness, Ty, what are you doing? So to me, I still think until something shows me otherwise, Ty's going to start the season opener, and that'll be the case until Georgia, until I have reason to believe otherwise.
I mean, AJ McCarron won multiple championships with Nick Saban with just having good defensive play and being a non-negative quarterback. Get it to your playmakers and let them thrive in space. So, I mean, absolutely, I agree with that. Last question, because it wouldn't be my show if I didn't throw one question about basketball in here. What are your kind of thoughts on? It was officially announced today that Alabama does take on St. John's in Madison Square Garden. What are your thoughts on the new gauntlet that's showing up for the schedule and the 4 guys that officially signed on today? Hoping there's another name coming out here soon. I was hoping we had a commitment by now because we know he was in town, but we will leave that one for now.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. One, it's a bummer that St. John's game, I think, is the day of the LSU game. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
November.
8th, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of a bummer it's around then because it's uh, too bad we don't get that St. John's game. Like, I've been a proponent, quick soapbox, Owen. I really kind of wish that basketball didn't start till January, so there could be the clear like separation of football season, basketball season, because I love both. I love covering both, and I kind of hate having to divide attention between the two. But anyway, I mean that should be a great game and a great test. In the gauntlet too, it's par for the course for Nate Oates, right? He kind of alluded to in some interview this offseason that maybe he would schedule a little lighter, but
That's why I brought it up because he specifically said, "I think I'm going to schedule a little lighter," and then he gets St. John's in Madison Square Garden, and some of the other games, like even Yale, right? I mean, Yale's not a walk in the park as like just
Auburn Giant Slayers, right?
yeah.
So
I mean, you've gotten like who he's scheduling does not seem to be the walk in the park that he almost alluded to. I mean, you knew he was never going to go to like a Buzz Williams A&M level bad schedule, but you assumed he may back off a little bit, and then it just a couple of big games, and that was not the case.
old habits die hard, Owen. So maybe I
Yeah,
can't. I should. We shouldn't be too surprised that Nate didn't change up too much. But so it's kind of usual. It's going to prepare him for some tough games, unless they happen to run into a superstar named Cooper Flag and a Duke machine. But otherwise, they just pretty much are facing the best the country has to offer. So it's a good spot to be in. Roster wise, yeah, we'll see if they add kind of how they fill things out. I believe you're alluding to Keontae Jones, right?
yeah.
He made that visit, so we'll see what happens there. I think they're in a good spot for him, and yeah, I think that would put them at what 12 if they got him.
Yeah, that puts him at
So
12. And actually, the Cedric Coward, we're recording this during the NBA Combine. Coward's looking to be showing out and measured absolutely insane. So the potential Coward sweepstakes against Duke may have been an okay thing that they missed out on him because it's feeling more and more likely that he stays in the draft. So, for everyone that was freaking out when Alabama didn't get him, like the end may not be over. But I appreciate your time. Like I said, I really appreciate you hopping on the show. I thank you so much for coming on. Please tell everybody where they can find you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, great to be with you. I've enjoyed the conversation. At underscore Nick Kelly is what where I'm at on Twitter, and AL.com is where you can check out our work. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick, for coming on the show. As I said at the top, if you do not follow Nick, you do not follow the articles he writes, you absolutely need to do so. He puts some of the best content for Alabama beat reporters out there. It is absolutely incredible. And thank you so much for joining.